What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Glovehound shop, where today we are working on this Wilson A2000 A2403 KIP catcher's mitt. This is going to be the first of hopefully many videos where I get to showcase some of the cooler gloves that come through my shop. When this customer first reached out about this glove, I had never actually seen this glove before. At first glance, you might think that it's just a regular A2403, which is the same model as the A2000 Pudge model. But the interesting thing about this glove is that it's actually made from KIP leather. For those of you that may not know, Wilson gloves are not usually made out of KIP leather. Wilson uses the term pro stock leather to describe their leather, which is a trademark term that doesn't actually mean anything. But in a What Pros Wear article from 2016, they are quoted as using steer hide leather. The other reason I believe they use steer hide is because if they used KIP, they would probably make a big deal about it, just like every other glove company does. So all that you've seen so far is just me cutting the laces out. Since I am pretty familiar with this model in general, I just went ahead and took all the laces out, but I do kind of keep an eye on things as I'm pulling it apart, just because I've never done this exact glove before. So you can see as I'm just pulling it apart, just kind of checking things out, and then I'm going to check on that palm adhesive just to see what that situation is like. And it actually looked pretty good. So we're going to move on to cleaning here. And in case you're wondering, the cheeseburger mug is actually mandatory. It will make your glove at least 8% cleaner, so I do recommend that. And then the cleaner that we're using here is our Ball Players Balm. If you've seen any of my videos or posts on social media, you know that I've been a big fan of Ball Players Balm for a long time. This stuff does an absolutely fantastic job. Now, you may have already noticed that major caked on dirt spot that we're working on. I was kind of surprised at just how thick of a layer of crud this was. So when I attack this, I like to do multiple lighter passes and let the brush and the soap do the work, rather than trying to go ham and get it all at once. So you can see there, I went ahead and did a first pass and then let it sit and did another section of the glove before coming back to it, just to let that water kind of soften up all that gunk that was stuck on there. And it did take me several passes to get it off, but you can see with each pass, more and more does come off. So a little patience pays off here, and we were able to get it completely removed. And what you saw was most of that cleaning. I did cut some parts out just because it was a little bit tedious, but I mainly just cut out maybe a couple of times that I went back to do another pass of scrubbing. Now, after so many passes, I will go in with just my finger and some soap and kind of get into the little nooks and crannies of that palm stamp, just to make sure that nothing's left behind. And then I'll come back with the brush to kind of clean up the leftover crud there. Luckily, the finger trick was able to do a pretty good job and get those places that needed just a little bit extra attention. I did do another pass over the whole glove just to make sure I didn't miss anything. So then we're going to go over the binding, and cleaning the binding is super important because that is really thin leather that is wrapped around the edges of the glove. So it's super important to take really good care of that because it doesn't have to go far to wear right through it. So I always make sure I go around the binding on both shell pieces as thoroughly as I can. Then I'm going to go back in with my finger and just kind of go under where the laces run to make sure I get any leftover dirt stuck under there. Then we're going to move on to the back piece. When I do the back piece, I like to divide it into sections with imaginary lines and just go section by section to make sure that I'm doing as thorough of a job as possible, rather than trying to just do it all at once. So you can see here, I'm going to start on the thumb and do that whole thing there. I'm going to get that label, and I'm going to go ahead and get the thumb loop as well. And I'm going to completely clean this part before moving on to the next. Now we're going to move on to the back of the fingers. It's really important to make sure you get in all those nooks and crannies. The backs of the fingers tend to fold over. It's really easy to overlook those folds, and oftentimes they end up drying out and cracking, and that is a pretty tough repair to do. So it's really important to make sure you take care of the backs of those fingers there. So we're going to move on to the pinky side. We're going to get down by the wrist. We're going to get that label as well. I'm going to go on to the inside here. This is where that toothbrush style brush, also from Ball Players Balm, really comes in handy. It does a great job of getting up into the fingers. It's important to make sure we do a good job of cleaning the hand stall because there's a lot of action from the hand going in and out. And so there's a lot of sweat and abrasion. So it's important that we get that as clean as possible so that when we condition it, we're not rubbing any contaminants deeper into the leather. So after we do that, we're going to move on to the binding on the back piece, making sure we get up by where the laces rub by the web. Then we're going to move on to the binding down by the hand, where it's most important to take care of it with how much your hand slides in and out and then sweats on that binding. In the hand area is where the binding tends to wear out the quickest, so make sure we get that nice and clean. We're going to go back around one more time where all the laces run, make sure we get any caked on residue that's hiding underneath there. And same procedure for the web, just cleaning it like we do the palm, getting a good lather on there. Making sure we get underneath where those laces run. And then here on the moisture wicking performance pad, as Wilson likes to call it, I am a huge fan of these as opposed to a traditional fur liner. The pro is that they do a really good job of absorbing the sweat. The con is that they do a really good job of absorbing the sweat. I've had some pretty gross ones that come through my shop where they don't necessarily look dirty, and then you squeeze the water out of that foam that's under the lining, and it's just brown from all the gunk that it's absorbed. So I really like to try to saturate that as much as I can with soapy water and then push it out so that it pulls all of the sweat and dirt out with it. I try to go until the water pushes out clear, and then that way I know that I'm good to go. So now it is the next day, and you can tell it's the next day because I'm wearing a different white shirt that I bought from the thrift store, and the glove has had plenty of time to dry. And you can see that big stain in the palm there. That's not dirt, that's just from the palm adhesive soaking through over time. And it's actually pretty common in these older Wilsons. It doesn't really have any negative effects to performance, it's just cosmetic. And some people actually prefer it. You can see just how quickly this leather darkens up with this conditioner. Of course, we're using our Ball Players Balm here, so I'm just going through, getting a first coat on everything, kind of letting it absorb for a minute while I do the rest. Making sure that I get the binding on all parts, the wrist piece, on both shell pieces. I get the palm area that I can reach with the rag, and then I'm actually going to put some on my hand and then rub it up into the fingers. And then after I do a first coat, I'm going to take this buffing brush and I get just a little bit of conditioner on it, and then I go through and buff the whole glove, all parts of it here. I do this for two reasons. One is to make sure that I get conditioner in every little crease and fold, and make sure that every exposed piece of leather gets conditioned so that it can be as strong and flexible as possible. And two is to make sure that I buff off any excess conditioner because nobody likes a greasy glove. This is something that I added to my routine just a few months ago, and I absolutely love it. I think it leaves the leather with such a beautiful finish when it's done. But it's really great for making sure that I get the binding completely covered and down in the folds of the back of the fingers. So now we're going to move on to lacing. You can see here I'm skiving this lace and then applying a coat of lace wax from the Glove Lab. We're skiving this piece because it's going to go here in the hinge of the glove. I always make sure that I skive the lace in the hinge here in catcher's mitts and then also in the palm of fielder's gloves. And then you saw I applied lace wax, and that is something that I apply to every lace before I put it in a glove. I love the lace wax from the Glove Lab. I honestly don't know how I lace gloves without it before I started using it. So you can see I have a few cuts in here. I just did this to try to make it a little bit quicker, but also still show you kind of what I'm doing. This is the first long form video that I've really tried to do. So let me know what you think in the comments. I'm excited to hear everybody's feedback and see how I can improve these videos. There is actually something that I do a little bit different on this style of heel. There are 2 horizontal runs up closer to the knuckle, and those have the smooth side up in the palm, and then there's 3 vertical sections closer to the heel of the hand, and those have rough side up. So when I lace this style of heel, I do it so that the rough side is facing up on all of the runs in the catcher's mitt rather than having a mix. It doesn't affect the functionality at all. I think it looks a little bit nicer to have all rough side facing up than to have a mix of both. The way that this one works is that you knot the 2 ends. The knot sits right on the edge of that glove, and you never actually feel this with your hand. It just kind of tucks up in there. And if you weren't watching this video or you had never taken a glove apart, you'd probably never even know that there was a knot there. So then after we do that, we're gonna just tap those laces down, make sure they're nice and flat and smooth against the hand. Then after we do the heel, I like to jump up to the base of the pocket. This was something that I learned from Dan Davis. I used to immediately jump to the thumb, but he recommended that I try it this way, and I have never gone back. I like how it anchors the center line of the glove rather than pulling the glove to the left or the right. I think it does a good job of setting the 2 shell pieces where they go before stretching them against the padding of the thumb and the toe. And you notice here, I use 2 needles. I try to use 2 needles as often as possible, so that way the lace isn't running through holes that it doesn't need to. This is usually easiest to do on symmetrical portions of the glove. So you saw I only used 1 needle with the heel. I suppose I could do 2 if I really wanted to, but it's just not a very long run. I don't think there's really any reason to do that. So after we do the base of the pocket, I like to jump to the thumb. And you'll see here, I'm leaving some slack in these laces, and I actually leave even more slack now than I do in this video. This video was shot several months ago, but I like to leave some spacing there because otherwise it's going to pull it in towards the palm before the spiral around the outside is completed. A lot of times you end up with the spiral on the outside being too tight, and it can just kind of throw off the feel of the glove if the tension is all wonky. So after I do the thumb, I move on to the pinky piece, and then you'll see I'll move on to the spirals on the outside. Then I'll go back in and pull all the slack out of the thumb and the pinky. It might seem like an extra step, but I really do think it makes a big difference in the overall feel of the glove. The goal of these laces are to define the toe and the thumb padding. So if you pull these super tight, it's going to squeeze that palm shell piece and pull it away from the back piece, and then it would make it super hard to lace the outside of the glove. Not to mention that if there's a lot of tension on the laces, then it can make them more likely to break. So the toe on this particular glove has 2 parts to it that tie in the middle near that vertical piece. So I start at the top and move towards the knot, and then start at the bottom and move towards the knot in the middle. Then we're going to move on to the outer spiral. So you see here I'm tying a knot and then I pound it flat. This is kind of a weird detail, but there are actually several ways that the beginning of these spirals are started. One of the ways is that you leave a little bit of extra lace on the inside and then wrap it in the spiral as you go around. The other way is to tie a knot in it like I do. Then there's a third way where you can cut a slit in the end of the lace and then run the lace through that hole so that it actually is laced through itself. And then on Rawlings gloves, the knot is actually on the outside and it goes down and then laces around itself and goes back up. So it's kind of hard to explain, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. And in this glove specifically, it had the little tail method, and I'm not a big fan of that. I almost never use this method when relacing a catcher's mitt because I have seen that pulled out, and that can be really challenging to put back in. But If you do it in the knot method, the slit method, or where the knot is on the outside, like in a Rawlings catcher's mitt, those almost never pull through. And I think it's just a much more secure way to do that. So my general philosophy on lacing is that OEM is always best. However, there are small details that I decide are a little bit better than how it came originally. I'm not really one for doing big mods and changing things up significantly when I lace gloves. However, there are times where, based on malfunctions that I've seen come through the shop and previous experiences that my customers have had, sometimes I make minor adjustments to try to avoid having those cases when I can. So here you'll see where these two meet, they cross one over the other, and then I leave enough to tie a knot there. After I get the outside spiral finished, then I go back through and tighten up all these laces. And like I said, it might seem like an extra step, but it really doesn't take that long, and I think it makes a huge difference. And then after I get the outer spiral done and the laces on the inside tightened up, then I go through and tap everything down with a mallet just to make sure everything is sitting nice and flat and flush. So then we're going to move on to the web. And the way I like to do it is I start in the middle, and then I do the top of the web, and then I do the bottom of the web. I like to start in the middle just so that the glove isn't flopping all around and then it's held in place. And this customer specifically requested to have the web laced nice and loose. So you'll see I leave quite a bit of slack in the laces as I do it. And there's quite a few cuts in this part, and that's just cutting out me messing and pulling and tugging and adjusting it exactly how I want it. Trying to make sure that it's loose but not too loose while also staying nice and even and centered. So after I do the middle section, I do the top spiral, and I go to the top spiral next because I think if you do the bottom piece, which is where there's usually either bars or X's, if you do the bottom part first, then it might pull the web down too far, and then it won't align properly, and the glove won't function as well. You see here I'm folding it to make sure that the web folds nice and even based on how the customer closes it. And then unfortunately I did kind of goof here, and you can't really see. I didn't have this framed up super well, so you can't really see what I'm doing at the top. But this glove had the X pattern at the top of the web. So I run through the web once, and then I do a spiral, skipping every other hole going one direction. Then I turn around and go back the other direction, which ends it at the opposite side where I started. I cut out a ton of me just tugging and pulling on it, tugging and pulling on it, tugging and pulling on it, trying to get it adjusted exactly how I wanted it. If you're gonna pay to have your glove relaced, you might as well have it relaced exactly how you want it. Since somebody's gonna be completely redoing all the laces, you can have them change it up just a little bit to suit your needs rather than being stuck with how it's laced directly from the factory. So then we're going to start here at the bottom of the web. I use 2 needles in the middle of the web, and I use 1 needle at the top of the web. But the bottom of the web is a section where I like to try to use 2 needles when I can. This glove originally came with an X pattern in these 4 holes, and this customer also requested to have it switched to bars instead of X's. So we're going to be doing that as well. So as I do this, I'm trying to make sure that I leave quite a bit of slack so that it's nice and loose. And this is something that I've had quite a few catchers request recently. The loose web is definitely gaining popularity for sure. Normally when I lace the bar style, I alternate between the two so that the bars all face the same direction. But on this one, I went ahead and just did the top piece first so I could get an idea for what the tension should be in all 4 bars. I did this just because there's 4 bars. Usually bar webs only have 3 and X's have the 4. You can change a web with 4 holes to bars, but you can't change a web with 3 holes to X's. And when I first started lacing, I was sold on the X's. I much preferred them to bars. I really didn't care for the bar laces, but they've definitely grown on me, and it seems like they put a little bit less wear on the glove than the X's. Also, if you're wondering, the lace width that I'm putting in here is 3/16 lace. Among lacers, that can be a pretty hot topic, is what width to use in the web of a catcher's mitt. Brands like Relace use 1/4 inch wide lace in the webs and the fingers of their gloves, and 3/16 inch wide lace in the rest of the glove. But companies like Wilson and All-Star use 3/16 inch wide lace throughout the entire glove. I think All-Star might actually just have recently started changing that to put 1/4 inch in the webs. And Wilson has started to use a lace that is in between 3/16 and 1/4 inch in the fingers and webs of their gloves. But this glove came with 3/16 inch lace in the web, so I usually put back exactly what I found in it, unless I think it's necessary to switch. So for a lot of higher level players that are catching serious heat, I'll go ahead and change it. But if it's a newer glove that breaks a lace and the holes aren't very stretched out, I really don't like shoving 1/4 inch lace through holes that were meant to have 3/16 inch wide lace in them, because it really can stretch out the holes. So that's how I approach it. I don't really have a hard and fast rule for how I do it. It kind of just depends on the glove and the needs of the player. So we finished that up, and then we move on to the wrist here. And this is pretty straightforward. Again, I'm going to use 2 needles starting at that thumb piece, working towards the knot on the back of the hand. See, this is a good example of an opportunity to use 2 needles instead of 1, because otherwise I'd have to start at one end and pull the whole length of lace through the holes of the first side and the holes of the second side. So not only is it unnecessary abrasion on lace that isn't even going to be in that part of the glove, but I think it also takes longer. You're pulling a longer piece of lace through holes that it doesn't need to anyway. So again, something I picked up from Dan Davis. He recommended using 2 needles everywhere it's possible. So I gave that a shot, and I actually noticed that I was able to relace quite a bit quicker by doing it this way. I don't know about you, but I'm just a huge nerd when it comes to gloves. So if you like this more detailed, in-depth baseball glove content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me, because I'm going to have lots more of this come out for you. Then here is the before. I was kind of a doofus and I took this video vertically, so I do apologize for that. And here is what the after looks like. You see how much gunk was in that palm when we first got it, and then we were able to get all of that out, and then we were able to leave that web nice and loose. I thought this was a pretty cool glove. Like I said, I had never seen this glove before, so I thought maybe some of you hadn't either, and I thought it would be cool to show that to you. We ended up switching out the brown lace to black, which I think really goes well with this color scheme. So anyway, that's all I have for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. This is the first one of these that I've ever done. I promise they will get better, but you got to shoot your first video at some point. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what kind of stuff you want to see. Hopefully I'll have some more videos out shortly. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to look both ways before you cross the street.